it doesn't look to me like pornography is really a very good idea. I don't think it's helping anyone. Now, you know, there might be codicils to that, freedom of expression, some potential educational utility, the pleasure that's a consequence of sexual utilization of pornographic material. But I would still say, seeing all that it's not a net social good. It doesn't do the people who produce it or who consume it any good. And I don't believe that anyone feels like a better human being after utilizing pornography for sexual gratification. Now, you might say, well, that's because they've been shamed about sex since they're born, and, you know, and that's a consequence of our crooked culture. And, you know, in a utopian world, we wouldn't have that shame. And yeah, no, it's way more complicated than that. And I read something in one of the YouTube comments in my video the other day. I was talking to Abigail Schreier about the apparent fact that today's teenagers are having much less sex. One person commented that there's the shame that men feel when sex is a spectator sport rather than a participatory act. And then you think, well, you know, the mere fact that you're watching two other people, one of whom isn't you, having sex instead of having sex, really implies something either about it implies something about your desirability. It's pretty hard to shake that, isn't it? Or your courage. Why is it that you're sitting there alone at night with your laptop on your lap? What the hell's wrong with you? Well, nothing. It's just we should dispense with sexual shame. It's like, no, probably not. That's probably not the answer.
Effect of free and widely available pornography is having on young people, especially men in our society at this time?
Well, I think it's like Treasure Island in Pinocchio. It's all pleasure with no responsibility. That's deadening. It's parasitical in a sense. And I don't mean that, I'm not making a value judgment. I mean, it's no wonder the young guys are caught up in this, because it's an unbelievably powerful technology. It drove the development of the internet, let's not forget, right? So it taps into one viciously primordial motivation. And so these guys are being blasted by what biologists call superstimuli all the time. So imagine that there's a biological stimulus that has an effect on you, and then you can magnify it. And the typical porn actress, not the amateurs, but the professionals, have their sexually provocative physical elements exaggerated. And so men are very visual in terms of their sexual processing. And so, you know, the guys are pulled into it, and they're pulled into it also by curiosity. But I think that ethically it's not good. It's not good. It's an easy out. That's the other thing, you know, is what you should be doing is going out and finding someone to have a relationship with. And if you can gratify yourself with no transformation, but let's say you can't find someone, well, then you might say that's an indication you should change. It is, in fact, an indication that you should change, because what better indication are you going to get than that no one wants to be intimate with you?
Right.
It's the ultimate rejection, and that's partly why men are terrified of it, and I understand that. And I also understand the MGTOW guys, you know, who are just recommending that men don't enter into long-term permanent relationships with women. I understand where they're coming from, although I called them pathetic weasels a while back. I shouldn't have done that. Well, they're providing a lot of young guys who need a kick to go out there.
Right, they're actually giving them the back door.
They're giving them a rationale, and I've seen this have very detrimental effects on a number of people already, and partly in my clinical practice, because these guys, the young guys who aren't successful, they're looking for a reason why women are terrible, because otherwise they have to think, well, they're just not presentable, which is what they do have to think, because that's almost the definition of presentable, right? So, and then the MGTOW guys give them a rationale, you know, we are in a gynocentric world and females have got control, and they'll like wipe you out if they have the opportunity. It's like, well, some females will do that to some guys some of the time. So I think it's reasonable to assume that there's a novelty edge in pornography, like there is in so many quasi-addictive phenomenon. And so it has to become, because novelty is a sexual kick, it has to stay novel, and that means that over time it's going to become more extreme. So that's not good. Well, so how do you resensitize yourself in some sense? Well, you stop. You stop. And then hopefully you recover. And then you deprive yourself of that outlet, let's say. And you might say, well, you know, is that absolutely necessary? And maybe there's nothing wrong with pornography. It's like, well, I don't know, man. Like, have you ever really met a guy who is proud of that? Like, you know what I mean? That makes him feel like, I'm the guy, man. You know, I'm watching pornography and getting off. It's like, what a man. I don't believe anyone feels that. And to me, maybe I'm wrong. And to me, that's an indication that, yeah, we know. No, it's pretty cheap. It's cheap. It's easy. And, you know, I say that knowing that I believe the research evidence shows that if you introduce pornography into a community, that rates of sexual crime committed by men upon women actually decline. So there is perhaps some utility in the outlet. But, you know, that's a unidimensional analysis and doesn't take into account all the other effects of pornography. Yeah. So, including the ones you described. And I think that those are real. It makes sense that they're real, you know, because it's super satiation. And it's a non-trivial technological problem. You know, it's now possible for young men to look at more beautiful nude women in one day than any man has ever seen, you know, prior to 10 years ago, 20 years ago, that any man in history had ever seen. That's not nothing. That's something. And to think that doesn't do anything to you, it's like, no, that likely does something to you. So don't substitute the false for the real. And don't underestimate the utility of deprivation. You know, what do we need to drive us forward to have the adventure of our life? You know, well, some deprivation, that's for sure. That heightens desire and drive, and maybe you need that. You're afraid to approach a woman. Well, you remove part of your drive with pornography, and so now you don't have that sexual urge to overcome that anxiety, and so you stay timid for your entire life. You know, maybe not, but maybe. They don't have a value hierarchy. So Pleasure Island, it's a good example. Those kids that were brought there were lost. So they didn't have anywhere to go. They didn't have an identity. So they default to local pleasure. And that's better than none. Although the problem with local pleasure, well, as the narrative made clear, is that you better look out if you're impulsive, because it's going to kick back on you hard. And the reason is, you're only considering the immediate time frame. And the problem is that things propagate across all the time frames. And so just because something works really well this second, cocaine, for example, doesn't mean that it's a tenable solution to the class of all problems. So usually, often, people pursue local pleasure because that's the best they can imagine. It's the best they've been taught. They don't see another alternative. So it can be ignorance. It can be they don't want to adopt the responsibility, because part of the problem with working at every level of the hierarchy simultaneously is that it's like dancing to a very complex waltz, let's say. You have to be paying attention to a very large number of things simultaneously and doing things right. It requires responsibility. And so, you know, it's a pain. It's a weight. Part of the reason people drink alcohol is to get rid of their responsibility. I mean, that's, you know, you hear people drink because they have problems. It's like, yeah, no. Some people drink because they're anxious, and alcoholics drink because they're in withdrawal. But young people drink because they're sick and tired of being responsible, because it's annoying. It's like, so I'll drink enough, I won't care about the medium to long-term consequences, because alcohol, that's exactly what alcohol does. It doesn't make you ignorant of the medium to long-term consequences, but it makes you not care about them. And partly it's because it dampens anxiety. So it dampens anxiety, leaves your positive emotion circuits intact, so then you can go out there and do stupid fun things, and that's a party, really. Let's go do stupid fun things. That's a party. But the medium to long-term consequences are, it's risky. It doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but it's risky. So yeah, they don't know better. That's the answer, I would say.